The Star Wars galaxy came under threat from dozens of great Sith Lords over the years, many of which you're probably familiar with. Most Star Wars fans are familiar with Darth Sidious, Darth Plagueis, and Darth Bane. The more knowledgeable ones would add Darth Revan, Darth Nihilus, and Darth Sion to that list as well. But what if we were to tell you that you're sleeping on one of the greatest Sith Lords of all time? The Dark Lord we'll be discussing today was a ruler of the first Sith Empire, an unstoppable conqueror, and an unbeatable lightsaber duelist. He was one of the greatest of his kind in an era when there were many Sith of incredible power. His name was Tulak Hord, and in this video, we'll be telling his story.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
In Tulak Hord's day, the Sith were much different from the Dark Lords we're familiar with. In those days, they weren't just a cult of Darksiders, they were also a species, a culture, and an empire. The original Sith species, which we'll henceforth call the Sith Purebloods to avoid confusion, evolved on Korriban, but they fled to frigid Ziost after Korriban was rendered desolate in an ancient war. They settled a small scattering of worlds in a remote part of the Outer Rim, cut off from the civilized galaxy by a ring of nebulae called the Stygian Caldera. In 6900 BBY, their civilization was conquered by 12 Dark Jedi, who proclaimed themselves the Lords of the Sith and established the first Sith Empire. The greatest of these Dark Jedi proclaimed himself the Dark Lord of the Sith, the ruler of the Empire. The second greatest became his shadow hand, while the remaining 10 simply became Sith Lords. The 10 Sith Lords sat on a council that ruled the Empire, of which they each controlled a piece. Most of the Sith Lords took on apprentices from among the Sith Purebloods to train in the way of the dark side. They found this an easy task, since most Purebloods were already attuned to the dark side to some degree. These apprentices usually came from the Kisai, the priest caste that had previously been at the top of the Sith hierarchy. Members of other castes, the Zul'Guruk engineers, the Massassi warriors, and the slaves, served the Sith Lords and their apprentices. The original Sith Lords weren't members of the Sith species, but many had offspring with Sith purebloods, allowing their bloodlines to flourish. Their non-Sith genes were quickly dispersed after a few generations, however, and once the last of the original Lords died off, Sith purebloods took the helm of the Empire, following their predecessors' teachings. In the centuries after the founding of the Sith Empire, it steadily began to expand, becoming larger, wealthier, and stronger. But it was routinely hampered by what would become a persistent curse for the Sith Lords: infighting. Some Sith Lords schemed against each other more than they did against the Empire's enemies, and upstart apprentices often banded together to kill Sith Lords and take their place, weakening the Imperial Council. The Sith Empire was in a constant state of flux, bouncing between periods of strength and periods of infighting. Tulak Hord was born into this turbulent political climate. It's never been confirmed exactly when he lived, but our best estimate would be around 6000 BBY. Hord was a Sith pureblood and was taken in for training by Sith Lords at an early age, as the dark side was strong in him. In that time, the Sith were making great strides in the use of lightsabers, developing the art of lightsaber combat far beyond any Jedi equivalents at the time. There were many great lightsaber masters among the Sith in those days, and Tulak Hord quickly became one of them. He was more powerful and more skilled than any of his rivals, and most of his masters as well. His power allowed him to rapidly rise through the ranks and become a Sith Lord. Early in his career, Tulak Hord won a lightsaber duel against a Dashade named Kemval, who pledged his services to Hord after his defeat. Together, Hord and Val mustered a huge army which they put to use suppressing rebellions on the remote Sith worlds Un and Shabosh. On the world of Un, he single-handedly broke the siege of a Sith citadel and personally led his troops into battle on Shabosh, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. This would be only the first of Hord's many campaigns. While on the front lines, Lord Hord was approached by Aloysius Kalik, a pureblood who aspired to learn the ways of the Sith Lords. Hord initially told him to piss off, but Kalik wasn't planning on taking no for an answer. After his dismissal, he challenged and defeated Horde's best general, leading the Sith Lord to reconsider his dismissal. He took Calig as his protege, putting him in command of one of his armies. Calig led Horde's troops to many victories, supporting his master as Horde continued his campaigns against rebellious worlds. During his battles, Tulak Horde used arcane Sith rituals to leech off the strength of his enemies, draining their power to increase his own. This allowed him to win battle after battle, as well as many new titles. He became known as the Lord of Hate and the Master of Gathering Darkness. Soon enough, he even became the Dark Lord of the Sith. Tulak Horde's first act as Dark Lord was to clean house, having everyone he considered a rival killed. This included Lord Calig, who Horde considered his greatest threat and marked as the first to die. The only being he spared was Kemval, who remained by Horde's side after his ascension. After consolidating his power, Horde escalated the scale of his conquests tenfold, bringing the full might of the Sith Empire to bear against rebellious worlds and newly discovered systems alike. As Dark Lord of the Sith, Tulak Horde became the most powerful Sith Lord to date. He was the greatest lightsaber duelist of his day, perhaps the greatest the Sith ever had, and not even the greatest of warriors could withstand him in combat. Later generations of Sith claimed he slew 1,000 Jedi, though this is questionable since the Jedi were unaware of the Sith Empire at that time. He was also skilled in the art of Sith alchemy, which he used both to enhance his own power and to create dark side imbued artifacts for himself. Though most Dark Lords of the Sith opted to create alchemically enhanced swords to channel their power, Horde instead made a fearsome black mask which he wore often, especially in battle. This mask shielded Horde from the heat of battle and made it harder for his enemies to detect him through the Force. Aside from being the greatest warrior of the ancient Sith, Tulak Horde was also the Sith Empire's most prolific conqueror. He easily quashed any and all rebellions that took place on Sith worlds during his reign, and he also brought new worlds into the Empire, making over 100 conquests of undiscovered planets in his lifetime. Among the worlds discovered by Tulak Horde was Dromund Kaas, the future capital of the reconstituted Sith Empire. The only obstacle Horde could never overcome in his quest to expand the Sith Empire was the Stygian caldera. He was so strong in the Force that he could rip cruisers out of the sky, but not even the power of the Force could move a nebula, nor could it allow Sith warships to fly through it. As Tulak Horde was a master of many things, many Sith sought to apprentice themselves to him. Horde refused nearly all of them, believing that only the strongest were worthy of his knowledge. He wrote a good many books and filled a holocron with his teachings, but he hid all of these in dangerous, hard-to-reach places on Ziost and Korriban, hoping that only the greatest of Sith would be able to find them. Despite his high standards, Tulak Horde did take on one apprentice later in his reign, a man named Ortan Sela. Sela learned a great deal from Tulak Horde, but as with all Sith, he eventually grew ambitious. One day, he stabbed his master in the back, killing him on the spot and denying him the honor of a last battle. Sela believed he had learned all Horde had to teach and that he would surely take his place as the Dark Lord of the Sith. However, he ended up being insignificant in the grand scheme of things and was outcompeted by more worthy Sith. Tulak Horde's followers entombed him in one of the greatest monuments in the Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban. His mask, holocron, and many of his boots were entombed with him and protected by a fearsome array of traps. While the Sith Empire lasted, he was remembered as one of the greatest of the Sith Lords, but knowledge of him faded after the fall of the Empire in 5000 BBY. His tomb was plundered and left in ruins by later generations of the Sith, and many of his teachings were lost. In later millennia, Tulak Horde was known only to a select few, and even then, only among the Sith. Once, Tulak Horde was the King of Kings, the greatest of the Sith Lords, but over the millennia, his legacy faded to nothing, buried beneath the barren sands of the Sith worlds. So, that's the story of Tulak Horde, one of the greatest Sith Lords of all time. But what do you think? Would you like to hear more about the ancient Sith? Feel free to post your recommendations in the comment section below. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.